All right, guys, welcome back. Welcome back. This is absolutely unbelievable to me. I've got to meet RA Dickey in person, but nevertheless, as a kid who loved baseball, as you guys know, loyal listeners, Cardinals is my team. And it was absolutely awful the year of 2010 when this mystical knuckleball pitcher came out of nowhere and was pitching for the Mets of all teams. And they're like, I'm thinking, please God, allow this knuckleballer to, fail soon. Because he's got a few good games in a row, a few more good games in a row. This thing seems like it might work. And I remember him getting drafted, and I remember he was, not the greatest pitcher in the world, but I don't know what just happened, but turn the tide, get rid of this guy, get him off the Mets, or allow him to keep failing, like one of the two, but don't allow him to be a star pitcher, and please God, don't let him win the 2012 Cy Young. So you've heard it a million times, but RA Dickey, you won the 2012 Cy Young Award. And man, I'm thankful to have you on the Journey of a Christian Dad podcast.
Oh, I'm so glad that we could find time to do this. I think it's incredibly important. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny how God uses all things for the good, even a New York Met pitcher winning the Cy Young Award. In 2012, I thought that was impossible.
I did too for a long time.
Yeah. So funny. I saw you speak maybe a few months ago, and you're like, yeah, winning the Cy Young. It was cool and all, but it wasn't all that big a deal for me, or whatever your words were. But I was like, what did he just say?
That's the old RA would have been the pinnacle of life, right? But the ever changing, hopefully being grown every day, RA understands that that's just a piece to share with people to be able to talk about how great God is.
Yeah, how cool is that? How cool is that? We had a guy named Chad Williams. He wrote a book called Seal of God, and he was on like the first episode I ever did. And he became a Navy SEAL, which was his pinnacle.
Cool.
And he said, I was never so depressed as like the next day or two nights later.
Yeah, I
There wasn't
understand,
another pinnacle.
man.
Yeah. Can you imagine winning the Cy Young and then becoming ultimately depressed and spiraling out of control?
I can absolutely relate to that, and I suffered a ton of failure throughout my career. Really, first 10 years, you mentioned it early. I wasn't very good. I'm very, very mediocre.
I went
As
back
a,
and took a look at your
yeah.
ERAs, and an ERA above 5 with consecutive seasons
Oh man,
on
it
and
was
on and on
hard,
is not good.
and that was when I was a conventional pitcher. I didn't turn to the knuckleball until basically 2005. I had always thrown it as part of my repertoire of pitches, but never full time, never 90% of the time in an outing. And as a conventional pitcher in the AL West, I just struggled and struggled, and so really grappled with my identity and my value as a human being, because I was looking through the wrong lens the whole time, really chasing something that was hollow, and it took me a long time and getting to the end of myself in a lot of different ways to figure out that that's where God wanted me anyway. It's just open-handed and on my knees, that posture of being on my knees and just asking every day for him to show up in some way, and he always would. Now, that doesn't mean like every day was great from then on, but I certainly didn't feel as alone. And I would say that's where, I would always get attacked by the enemy early on in my career in particular, because if I had a bad outing, or, I was like a roller coaster, man. And I wasn't fueled by addiction like a lot of people when they want to medicate when things don't go well. But I would get super depressed and lonely and, just dark. It's dark. It's how I could probably describe it best. And so, that took a long time and a lot of growth and a lot of people who loved me well to come alongside me and help me see it differently.
I hear you keep talking about that over and over and over again, the people that came around you. And it seemed like there was always somebody right around the corner for you that maybe showed up in an unexpected way, or whatever it was and kind of brought you to the next step?
Yeah, I think it was both, really. I think it was, the stability of a good woman too, who had been there the whole time, and been, loyal and kind and um, faithful and like all of it. So there was that for sure. So there was always that to bounce off of, which at the end of the day probably saved me in a lot of different ways. But I also hungered for like male companionship, like iron sharpening iron, like
Yeah.
and not really knowing how to do that, because you know I just didn't have the equipment from my early experiences as an 8, 9 year old and going through a lot of sexual trauma and all that stuff. I didn't know how to connect with another man very well. And so that is the piece that you reference. Like people would always show up that would say the right thing or be available or just be there. And that was something that was very new for me. And it really helped me in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Love the kid in high school. You transferred, went to a private school, left your kind of financial situation. You're in a lower income situation, switched over to maybe I'd like financially elite, which I did too when I switched from a kind of meager place to a place where a 14-year-old kid had his own Porsche with personalized plates, and the dad bought him the one parking space that the school auctioned off.
No mercy.
I'm
Yep.
like,
So
this is
you were
different.
like, it was
Like,
different.
he's not old enough to have a license.
It was different. I was getting a personalized license plate from my box of Frosted Flakes for my bike. Like,
Right.
I don't know if people probably won't remember that, but you could send off for like a personalized little mini plate that you could put on the back of your bike. That's where I was coming from over to what you just described. And it was a whole different world for sure.
Yeah, yeah. In your book, you mentioned the polo symbols on the shirt and the Knights of the Round Table, and it was
Yeah. Yeah.
certainly that same transition for me, where I'm like, what is happening? Like, what are these guys talking about? And businesses that these people own. And some guy got drunk at an auction and bought a parrot, a couple
Oh,
grand
dear.
on a parrot that he wasn't expecting to buy. Like, that's nice to have money just falling out of your pocket that you don't care
And
about.
on parrots. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Hey, honey, sorry about that. So, um, the kid in high school, the guy that kind of maybe you're even partially afraid of because you'd been in a bunch of fights and different things, and then he shows up and you're thinking, man, this guy's chiseled and tough, and he keeps hanging around. I sure hope he don't want to fight me.
Well, I don't know if I was afraid because coming from the public school system in Nashville over to the affluent kind of private school, there were a lot of, I think people were probably more afraid of me just because of where I'd come from than, and I was over there to play sports too, like that was a reason for me
Right.
to get over there. That was, someone saw me play and thought, man, that might be a good fit over here. And so I was scholarshiped over there and that was helpful for me. But I was kind of the guy that was coming in that probably everybody was looking at, uh, not in an alienating way, but certainly in a very, very curious way because um, I was just, I just came from a different culture a little bit, and so I wouldn't say I was afraid of people down there. I think, and I certainly wasn't, and this is not, I'm not boasting about this. I think it's bad, but I certainly was not afraid of uh, a physical confrontation, which is why I kind of, I acted out a lot in that way growing up, trying to feel value because I could enforce my will upon somebody, that's not good. And I'm talking about when I was 11 and 12 and 13 years old. And so that part wasn't a big issue for me. But I think I was mostly afraid of not people, but just the experience of a thing, the foreignness of a thing. Even now I find myself really craving routine and structure and habit. And when I get outside that, I can feel like a little bit of twinge of anxiety. And that's kind of where I was perpetually over there. Was I'm out of my element here. And that's what I was afraid of more than anything, and afraid of failing. Like I was afraid of failing. It was a time in my life when, a lot of things were coming together in a negative way. Having suffered sexual abuse early in my life, really didn't develop like I said before, the equipment to be able to do relationship well. And so that would manifest in toxic ways in relationship. And my parents were divorced, and I was kind of the latchkey kid running around, living with different people and grandparents and aunts and uncles and all kinds of stuff. So, it was a real kind of tough time in my life. And I found a lot of value in my athletic, being good at athletics. And so that's where that toxic journey of seeing myself through that lens, and my value probably started, was that I would turn to that when I was in pain a lot. So football, basketball, baseball, I played all three at the high school and grew up playing those three. And that was kind of my sanctuary growing up. And so that was who I was.
Yeah, yeah. When I saw you speak, you spoke about the sexual abuse when you were young, and transitioned to like keeping people at arm's length, and you also
Mhm.
felt less than. And I think a lot of people in the room, related to that, because a lot of people can feel like they're not worthy of certain things, or feel like they are less than other people, and comparison, and a bunch of different things like that. So
And I wasn't a believer at the time. When I came to the MBA, Montgomery Academy, which is the private school, I didn't know who Jesus was. I didn't have any relationship, didn't know anything about, the Bible, or the stories that the Bible taught, or all that. Like I didn't have any real education around that. Other than, like, I occasionally would go to church with my grandmother. But it was much more just to be with her. I mean, I didn't really pay attention. And so when I got to there, I had no real, there was nothing to really guide me in my path. Like I didn't have anything to bounce off of other than athletics. That was my guide, right? Like that was my idol. And myself, I was my own idol, and so was athletics, and I was pretty good at athletics. And so I got a lot of validation from that.
yeah, absolutely. Hey guys, quick side note. Grandma took RA to church, so at least he had a little bit of something there. So when you're that
But
guy and you see the opportunity to bring a kid with you whose parents aren't going to bring them, look for the opportunity. Bring somebody else's kid, and who knows what that changes or plants in that kid's life, or maybe that kid starts coming all the time and then the parents show up. So you can make a big difference by just that small thing. So pretty cool grandma took you.
yeah, yeah. And it was, she was probably, my parents did the best they could with what they had. I didn't have a real good relationship with my father, and my mom. I shared with the men that day that you saw me, that she was in and out of rehab. We have a great relationship now, and she's been sober for a long, long time, and she's incredible. But at that time in my life, I didn't have any real model for how to behave, how to act, what to do. And so I was coming up with it on my own, and I was great at pretending. But my grandmother offered, just a little bit of stability and a little bit of love and kindness. And, I'd spend the night at her house on Saturday night. And my grandfather would drop her and I off at church, at West End Church of Christ. We'd go in there, and I'd sit beside her and just be with her. And then we'd come home and have breakfast together. And like, it was just relationship, right? Like that's what it was about for me at that time, is relationship. And, little did I know that going to church with her, a few times, planted a little bit of a seed for sure. I was soft-hearted when it came to that stuff. I was not at all standoffish to the idea of who God was, or what he had done for me, and that was a big part of it.
Yeah, that's something we do is relationship. Invite somebody, hey, you want to go, to church, and then right afterwards we'll catch some lunch, or we'll
Yeah.
attend Donuts Sunday or something like that. And make it more
Yeah.
about relationship and less about, the monumental thing of showing up to a church.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And but yeah, being there with relationship first, and then developing it from there, and hopefully having people ask a few questions or look at your life. And that type thing. Something I love about you when I hear you speak, when I, read your book, I think, what a smart guy, what an intelligent guy. I was thinking, wow, what a great writer. And then come to find out, you love English and that was a subject you studied. So
Yeah, that was
that was a
my,
talent you had.
and I'd always found that I was all the time when I was a child. I was always looking for relief, right, in some way. So a lot of times when I'd get on a court or a field or a mound, that was relief for those 2 hours. And I also felt that same kind of relief when I would write. And I was like that early on. God just put that in me and born. And I didn't really grow up around any writers or, it wasn't part of my life. In fact, I didn't really like reading up until I got into, my junior, senior year of high school. But I loved writing and felt relief. Sometimes when I could put words on a page, it was my outlet a lot of times. And so to deal with a lot of the pain internally that I was feeling as a teenager and growing up, I would put on a page. And that's ultimately how I wrote my book. I had journals dating all the way back to my 8th grade year at MBA. And so I was
Wow.
able to go in those moments back to those times and get real. I didn't have to sensationalize anything because, it was all there on paper, and I'd always kept them and still have them and still write. And so journaling was a big part of my life for a long time. And there's something real permanent about the written word. And I felt like once I got something down, it could get off my back a little bit, because it was not ultimately it was just relief, right? It was just a short-term relief. Those things would always start creeping back in because I didn't have any real sustaining joy. And that was tough, but that did give me some relief writing.
Yeah, I love that. The habits, the rituals, the things we do and build positive. So
Yeah.
the writing is something that I think a lot of guys struggle with.
Yeah. It might be, I don't know. I mean, I speculate sometimes that it's how we're wired as men, like it takes, not that we're not thoughtful or intentional, but we have to learn that attribute most of the time. It's not something, it's like throwing a knuckleball. Like I had to throw a million reps before I understood kind of how to make it do what it does. And, you just got to practice those things, sitting down for 15 minutes and being intentional with a thing that you might not feel like is important, but it actually is really, really important. That takes practice and building habits and things like that. And so I would, if you read my book, that like after I would have an outing, sometimes I'd keep a diary and I'd go home in that night and write about it, whether it was I got blasted or I did great. And I would put those diary entries throughout the book just to bounce off of, to give the reader an idea of kind of what the feelings were after you gave up 7 runs to the Cardinals, or you shut,
Good
or you
job. Good
shut,
job. All right.
or you shut them out. So, like you said, I've always appreciated the written word, and it's been real helpful in my life.
So you brought up the knuckleball. Tell us about like that transition. I know the story, but I'll let you tell it when and
Yeah.
if you include the part where you realize that pitching wasn't your thing.
Well, it was scary. The transition was scary. I'd been a conventional pitcher. I was drafted as a conventional pitcher. I was a hard thrower. I threw mid-90s when I got drafted in 1996 and by the Rangers. And the first 10 years of my career, I was just like we talked about earlier, like I was okay. And I would have flashes of being good enough for them to promote me a little bit, but I could never really sustain anything anywhere. And got to the big leagues up and down as a conventional pitcher. So I got a little over 2 years of service time out of 10 as a conventional pitcher in the major leagues, but my velocity started to decrease. And being in the AL West, it was really hard because there's a lot of great hitting teams and I was getting shellacked. And so when I was in the big leagues, I had a particularly poor outing and got called in the office, and I knew like,
Was that Vladimir?
I'm probably, yeah, I threw a fastball away to Vladimir Guerrero, and I'll never forget. Like,
and it was good coming off your hand,
oh,
right?
I felt great. It felt like I was in college again. And I looked up at the board and it was like 87 miles an hour. And I thought, uh-oh, that's not good. And he hit a ball so hard. By the time I got my glove up, it was like ricocheting off the back wall. And I knew at that point, like, it's probably ain't going to work much longer. And so I got called into the office after the game, and Buck Showalter was my manager at the time, and Oral Hershiser was my pitching coach, and a guy named Mark Connor, who I love so much, it was my bullpen coach. And they were all in there with the general manager, and they said, "Hey, RA," and I thought the next words out of their mouth were going to be, we're releasing you, not even sending you down, but we're releasing you." But what came out of their mouth next really changed the course of my life. And Buck said, "We think that you could be a really good knuckleball pitcher, and we want to send you down to the minor leagues to try to figure that out." And I thought, well, that was different. And in the moment, I think the hair probably stood up on the back of my neck, and my ego was trying to get in the way. And this was a real kind of God moment for me. I think, I mean, all our moments are God moments, but when you really feel like he stepped in, because I felt my ego kind of come over me, like, you can't tell me that I can't do something, right? Like
Right.
my whole life I've been able to do it, and I'm going to keep being able to do it. Now I might have had a setback here, but I'm going to figure it out. And if you release me, I'll just go somewhere else, and
I'll
and
show you.
I'll show you. Yeah. And so I could feel that coming over me. And about a quarter through that feeling, I felt that arrest, and I felt this real peace come over me. And I said, "That sounds like a good plan." And I don't even know to this day really why I said that, because I didn't think it was a good plan. I thought it was a horrible plan, but that's what came out of my mouth. And thankfully, God helped me to take my ego out of it and just be receptive to some people who saw something in me I couldn't see myself. They had seen me play knuckleball catch on the side when we warmed up, and Oral Hershiser, I remember him walking behind me a bunch of times when we were playing catch and say, "Man, that thing's good. You should throw that more often." And I didn't really think anything of it. As my catch partner was like missing them, and it was going off his leg, and it was dancing around everywhere. And I'd throw one or two in a game, but it's just such a hard pitch to control that I didn't throw it a lot because I didn't want to be behind in the count. And so they said, "Why don't you go down and do that?" And so I said, "Okay." And I went down to AAA and began my journey as a knuckleballer in 2005, midway through the season.
So you were a super stubborn person, to your benefit and to your detriment.
I prefer relentless.
Relentless. There we go. Todd Stottlemyre word. Relentless. So
It was stubborn for sure.
so you were in college, hoping to get to the College World Series. I think you're maybe 2 games away or so from getting there, and you're the starting pitcher that day. Maybe you'd pitched 8 innings. Maybe you'd thrown 150 pitches, give or take.
No goodness. Yeah, that was when was that? That was 1993. We were trying to get the College World Series for the University of Tennessee, and I'd pitched on a Thursday, I think, against the Citadel, and threw 7 or 8 innings and probably 120, 130 pitches. And then I came back on 2 days rest and threw against Oklahoma State, and that game went 11 innings, and I threw 182 pitches.
Yeah.
And so between a 4-day span, you can do the math. I threw well over 300 pitches, but we won. We won in extra innings, 3-1. And Coach Delmonico tried to take me out multiple times, and we almost fought. And so we ended up going, but it was costly because I got killed in the World Series because I just was so tired.
Yeah, your coach comes to you and say, "A good game, 150 pitches, like, we're going to turn this over to the bullpen." No, you're not.
Yeah. I was not coming out without making a scene. That's for sure.
You finished the 9th. Hey, you're done. Finish the 10th. No, you're done. No, I'm not.
Well, I had only one more "no, I'm not" in me, and then I was out after that. I was not going. The 11th, believe it or not, was going to be my last inning.
Okay. My goodness, that is just unreal. And then I'm thinking, as I'm hearing the story, you're going to get drafted. Like, this is not good when you're going to get drafted.
Yeah, no, that wasn't good. Like in this day and age, that stuff would have never happened. That was back when, you couldn't look up at the board and see how hard you were throwing or the number of pitches that you had thrown. It was all just kind of gut and feel and kind of the old school way of pitching where you'd look and, you'd see Nolan Ryan going 170 pitches and striking out 16 in 9 innings. It's
Yeah.
that kind of mentality was still permeating through the baseball landscape. And so it would have probably put somebody in jail today. But back then,
I got a little rec league team and I got a
yeah.
10U team. They're young, 8 and 9 year olds. And this girl, I say to her dad, we didn't have a second pitcher that day. And I said to her dad, I said, hey, you mind if I run her back out there for the third inning? Would that be okay? And he looks at me and he goes, it is, isn't it? I said,
Oh my goodness.
well, I think so. And he says, well, I certainly think so. Because is she
Yeah.
tired? I don't know. She wants to go the third and the fourth and the fifth. And I'm okay letting her if you're okay letting her. He goes, why are you asking me? I go, well, some parents would have a hard
Yeah.
time. I'm like, she's throwing all of 25 or 30 miles an hour underhand.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
I'm like, but I don't want you to hate me after today. So I figured I'd ask your permission. He's laughed. He goes, has it come to this these days? I go, I think so. I'm pretty sure.
Oh man, well, multiply that by a factor of 100, and that's about what you're working with in baseball now. And
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
seeing it big league level too. You got guys that can't throw 200 innings. I mean, that used to be the low point, right? Like if you were a starter and you couldn't go 200 innings and you weren't going to get paid for what you did very well. So
So
I
you
came
had,
up under that mentality.
yeah, you had the craziness of getting drafted and first round draft pick. They're going to offer you 810,000 plus some college money. So it rounded out to almost $1 million. They do a little thing and figure out that you don't have an ulnar collateral ligament, which means you, in your mind, you can't get Tommy John surgery and your arm's
Yeah.
awesome. So this is a win. This is
Yeah.
fantastic.
Big win. That's not how they saw it, obviously. The Rangers, when they drafted me, found that I didn't have that Tommy John ligament, that UCL in my right arm, and they reduced my bonus because of that, because they thought they drafted damaged goods. And I got to the last day before I had to report to class, even back at I was drafted after my junior year of college, and if I stepped foot on a campus for my senior year, I was ineligible to sign from then on. So I chose to take the abbreviated offer. They went from $810,000 down to $75,000, and I just thought, well, I'm going to bet on myself here and get my professional career going so I could get there quicker. And there was no guarantee I would ever been drafted again anyway with that condition in my arm, so I took the risk and ended up getting up there as a conventional pitcher, which in retrospect now, I had to battle through quite a bit to get there. Never had the surgery. I was never hurt. They thought I was going to have the surgery, and I was asymptomatic. Like I didn't have any symptoms. And that might have been why I could throw 185 pitches on 2 days rest and not blow out, because I didn't have anything in there. And I always, my agent, I made the argument, hey man, like this is a bonus. You should getting paid more because they don't have to worry about that. And they used it as the opposite, obviously. So I got started with my career and ended up getting up there after 6 years in the minor leagues, and just working my way up from A ball to AA to AAA, and then ultimately the big leagues, and then had a couple of cups of coffee up there.
End up pitching, I think, 5 seasons over 200 innings
as a conventional pitcher. Yeah. I mean, I had runs where I was okay, but I just couldn't sustain it. I just didn't have enough gas, and I wasn't ever.
I mean, five seasons as a 200 inning pitcher.
Oh yeah.
When you were knuckleballer. Yeah. When you're knuckleballer.
Yeah. As a knuckleballer, I actually had 6 because, the year I got called up, I'd already thrown 60 innings and at AAA, and then threw 178 or 180 for the Mets in 2010. So that was almost 240 innings there. So, I was real fortunate. That pitch, the knuckleball allows you to, if you can figure it out, it allows you to not have to worry about pitch counts or innings or things like that, because you're throwing it with a lot less effort, and it's much more about technique than velocity. And so that allows you to do some different things.
You're throwing high 70s, low 80s.
Yeah. But it, before I was throwing, trying to throw right? Like, and trying to go 90, like that's the difference. If it was just coming out nice and easy at 90, that's one thing, but it wasn't. I was trying to step on the gas every single pitch, and that over time just wears you out. But with a knuckleball, my comfort zone was high 70s, low 80s. And so I could sit out there all day and throw that pitch without much fatigue.
So a lot of guys listening played baseball, threw the fastball, started tinkering with the curveball because people told them not to. And they started figuring it all out. And then, hey, there's this knuckleball thing that sounds mystical and isn't true. And maybe the Necro brothers were doing their thing. And you're like, oh man, that is true. That, like, maybe I can do this. And so quite a
Sure.
few of us toyed around with that knuckleball. And obviously your grandpa, showed you a thing or two,
Yeah.
and you played
Yeah.
with it all your life. And then you had three different guys come into your life at different times, and each one of them gave you a little something. And
Mhm.
you're like, if the last guy would have came first, it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, no, it was God's timing through and through. I mean, when I was learning the knuckleball in '05, I went down without any kind of instructor or any kind of instruction. It was just kind of go down there and figure it out. You throw a pretty good one up here playing catch, but throwing one on the side playing catch with your buddy is a whole lot different than trying to get a major league caliber hitter out and trying to hold runners with it and throw strikes with it and change speeds with it. And so when I went down, my very first outing against the Iowa Cubs, I gave up 10 runs in one inning. I mean, one outing. So I went 5 innings and gave up 10 runs. And I thought, oh my God, what have I done? Right? Like, this is not the journey for me. Thankfully, I showed up the next day and kept working, and showed up the next day and kept working. There was a real, consistency. Like I always enjoyed the work. That was important. I always enjoyed the work. I would commit to the work, and I would work while I waited. And I always was trying to tinker with it, throwing it off the outfield wall over and over again during batting practice, finding anybody I could play catch with to throw it. And I would throw multiple bullpens in between outings and live batting. Like, I would do whatever I could, but I had to do it on my own, just trying to figure it out. And then the Rangers set me up with Charlie Huff. Charlie Huff was a longtime knuckleballer in the big leagues, had a great career. And I flew out to Los Angeles and worked with him a couple different times. And he taught me a new grip and a little bit of the philosophy behind that. And then I moved on to Tim Wakefield, who I had gotten up there in 2008 with the Seattle Mariners, just for a little bit of time. And the Boston Red Sox happened to be playing during that time, and he reached out to me and let me watch his bullpen the day he threw it in Seattle. And he gave me a little something else with my follow through and the way I released it, my release point. And then I moved on to the master Phil Necro, who won over 300 games, Hall of Famer in the big leagues. And he gave me all he had, and he introduced me to using my hips a little bit more. And he was like, hey man, you need to be throwing this pitch as hard as you can throw it and take spin off. And he always, he described my knuckleball as an angry knuckleball. And I thought that I liked that, because that's what I felt like I could do that was different, that separated me from every other knuckleballer in history, was that I could throw a real hard one. And he said, you need to be throwing that as hard as you can. And I wasn't doing that. I was trying to be Charlie Huff. I was trying to be Tim Wakefield. And he said, no, man, you need to be you. And you is throwing it hard, attacking hitters with that angry knuckleball and seeing what happens. And, it took about 6 months of really training that in. And then that was right before the 2010 season. And really the rest was history after that, but it took the timing of all three of these men investing in me, and at the different points of, these different inflection points of my career that really changed the course. And that was just, and I was asking God all the, I had really renewed my relationship with Christ at that time. And I came to know Christ as a 14-year-old kid at NBA. And, but I didn't really have anybody help cultivate the relationship piece. And so it took me a long time before I really got people in my life that helped me with that. And people came into my life without me even asking to help me with that. And so I was growing as a human being over here. And, my vocation, what I did, baseball, that was kind of growing too at the same time. And that's no coincidence. God was putting people in my life, both as a professional and as just a father and a husband and friend and a son, to help grow me there too. And there's a lot of, it wasn't always sweet and wasn't always nice. There, I fell down a ton, but had a lot of people beside me to help pick me up. And that was real important.
So asking God, praying, do your thing, let God do his
Yeah.
thing, trust God.
Just the posture of it, like just being, and just, there's a great book out there called Ego is the Enemy. And
Yes.
just trying to take my ego out of it completely, and just being a lifelong learner. Like that was the key for me, is just, I would try to be a sponge and absorb everything that I could from people who knew more than I did. And I felt this, because I had accepted Christ as a 14-year-old, I had the Holy Spirit, and it was constantly like help reminding me to, get in the word, or reach out to this person, or get on your knees. And I would just be real obedient, try to be obedient to that. And I would also be like this, before I was like, God, I got to make it. This is who I am. I can't do anything apart from this. And God was like saying, no, man, I'm going to bring you to the end of yourself. And then you're going to see what I can do. And he did. I mean, I was on that. I said I had that inflection point when Buck called me in the office. I thought I was going to be released. And that was one of those moments where God was saying, hey, man, you're going to trust me because I love you. And here's an opportunity. And so I took that opportunity and tried to just a little bit at a time go like this. Now I wasn't all the way like this, but those fists were starting to unclench a little bit. And so I would, and over time, it just got more and more like this. Like God just used me, man. I just care about being a good father and a good husband and a good man. And this other stuff over here, this stuff that I thought was my identity for so long, that kind of just was the thing I was good at, and that's how it worked for me. And I understand it doesn't work like that for everybody, but I had to be willing to surrender whatever this thing over here was, this baseball thing, whatever it was. I had to surrender to the fact that God was going to use it. He had put it in my life for a reason. He had brought people in my life to really help cultivate it. And whatever it was going to become, it was going to become. And I was going to ride it out until God told me to do something different. And he told me to do something different in 2017 when I walked away from the Atlanta Braves, and I still had more gas in the tank, and I could have kept going, but it was time for me to be a full-time father and husband. And but it took a lot of people loving on me. Like I said at the beginning, like nobody is a self-made man or woman. And if you wake up with this sense of gratitude in the morning, it really puts your life in a whole different perspective. Like you get to see things through a real neat lens. If you wake up with a gracious spirit, and one that is just thankful for opportunities and time and resources, and it's very, very helpful.
Do you have something you do in the morning to make for sure that happens every day?
Yeah, I just breathe and meditate a little bit, and it's not long. I wake up and kind of swing my legs over the side of the bed, and my feet are touching the floor, and I'm sitting down on the edge of my bed, and just take like 5 or 6 real deep breaths and just say thank you in between every breath. And just thank you for my wife. Thank you for my life. Thank you for my relationship with you. Thank you for whatever opportunities come my way. Thank you for the ability to be able to see and have vision, not just see physically, but have vision for my family. Thank you for the scripture. I just think about all the things that I'm hopeful for and thank him in advance, and the things that I'm thankful for in the moment. And it literally takes 45 seconds. And then I can start my day at least with that posture of being thankful. And, I think thankfulness really breeds humility, and that's where God calls us to be, like God calls us to have humble spirits. And all my best decisions have been made in a posture of humility. And I think that's important to recognize, with, this balance between the humility of taking me out of it and the confidence of having God speak into it, right? Like there is that balance, right? And that takes practice, just like anything. And so there have been plenty of times when I thought it was God and it really wasn't. It was me just imposing my thing in it. And God would say, no, like I'm going to let this fail, or I'm going to intervene through another person. And then there's sensitivity to the Holy Spirit's there, and it helps you make good decisions. But if you start the day with that posture of just gratitude and humility, then God has the freedom to kind of move in and out of your life in real powerful ways, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I find it important also to start the day with gratitude and prayer. And if you start your morning right, the rest of the day goes so much better. So you had a real, I'll call it the pit when you were in the minor leagues. You know, the blessing was they said, go out there and, just keep throwing that knuckleball and figuring it out. Drawback is, as a person that, wants to succeed, wants to win, that wants to be competitive, with a junk knuckleball that sometimes floats in there and then gets smashed over the outfield wall night after night after night, and the manager coming out saying, "I see you in 5 days." I
Yeah.
don't really want to do this 5 days from now.
Yeah, that's where that stuff, so if the toxic side is stubbornness, then the healthy side is being relentless, right? Like if those are the two.
Yeah, yeah.
I was thankful for a lot of times for just the relentlessness of just pursuing my craft, like I, yes, I was stubborn, but at the same time, if it weren't for that kind of manifesting in the form of relentlessness, then I would not have ever achieved some of the things I was able to, just because I loved the work, like I said before, and I wanted the work. And so, my spirit was broken over and over and over again because I would give up tons of runs, and it was hard. And, but I always had the latitude to fail. I had people like that said, "Hey, we know it's going to be hard. We know you're going to fail. So use this as a canvas to try to figure it out." And so I always had the hope on the backside of that I was going to get another opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
That was a God, God gave me that gift. And so I got a little bit better every single time. So I gave up 10 runs the first time and gradually got better and better until I got an opportunity away from the Rangers organization with the Seattle Mariners. I pitched really well in the minor leagues for the Milwaukee Brewers, and in 2007 when I won the PCL Pitcher of the Year, and that kind of catapulted me into a position where I started to get some real time as a knuckleballer with multiple teams, ending with the 2010 the New York Mets, where it really transformed.
And when things were rough in the minor leagues, you and your wife, I would say on your side, came home bad attitude and
Oh, it was
things.
rough. Yeah, it was rough. I had, really made poor decisions around dealing with the pain of not being good. Whether it was, talking in a way I shouldn't to my wife, or, whatever. Like I had jeopardized my marriage in a lot of different ways. And, she, she was so loyal and so loving and, so tolerant, just really exemplified, what God talks about in scripture of what love really is. And it really helped me. It helped me to see what it like. She lived it out in a lot of ways that were motivating for me, because it matched up perfectly with scripture. Like, true love keeps no record of wrongs. Are you kidding? Like, that's
Yeah.
just, to live that out and to see that lived out, you talk about a transforming motivational behavior, man. And that's what she offered me, like that was her gift to me. One of her gifts to me was that. And so, I had wrecked my marriage in a lot of different ways by my own doing, and she still was stalwart in her belief that I was a good man and had a lot to offer, and she was in it with me, and she had made a commitment under covenant with God to stick in it, and she did, and I did, and we have a good marriage, and I'm so thankful for that. That's one of those things I wake up and in the morning when I put my feet on the ground and just say thank you for that. But it's not perfect. No marriage is, and that's the beauty. Like, we both recognize that. I think that's part of our solution to things, is to understand that we're both broken and in need. And if you have that posture, it puts you right back into a place of humility, and you can be vulnerable and you can say you're sorry. So many of us, I think, when I work with other people, just sharing my story, they have a real hard time with those words, "I'm sorry" or "forgive me." Like, the repentant heart is a hard heart to come by, because we're in constant conflict with wanting to be right all the time and how good it feels to be right and wanting to, lord that over people. So I think our most tender times in our marriage have been times when we've been both broken before each other, and whether it's arguing about the kids or money or whatever, like real life arguments, that's just life, and me saying, hey man, I'm so sorry I raised my voice and I shouldn't have. I was just passionate about this, and forgive me. I'm gonna try to work on that. Like that's intimacy. And that's what is really, really hard, especially for someone like me. Like she had a lot. That was one of her gifts. She grew up in a real stable family with loving parents and had it modeled for her how to be kind in a marriage and what that looked like in a healthy way. I did not have that. Like I grew up with not a good model, and I didn't know how to treat a woman, and I didn't know how to treat a wife, and I didn't know the duties that I was called to scripturally. And I had to learn all that, and I'm still learning that. I'm
Still
still
learning.
learning.
Yes.
Yeah. And like the lifelong learner piece comes in, right? I mean, you just like in my vocation, I'm, Charlie Huff told me my very first lesson with him. He said, listen, man, he said, this is something that you're never going to master. So don't think of it in terms of mastering something. So whenever anybody says, hey, how did you master the knuckleball? I stop them right there and say, hey man, it's an ongoing journey. Like I'm not, it's the same thing in marriage, right? Like there's no mastering in marriage. It's a constant, it's the sharpest blade in God's holster on how to cultivate you as a Christian man, as marriage, I feel like, because it's constantly asking you to lay your life down, like constantly, all the time.
Constantly.
And that's okay. Like there's a lot of gifts in that. But that is his sharpest blade in my life, is my marriage, right? Like he penetrates me to the core with the tool of marriage.
Yes, 100%. So at some point, things got so rocky that I think the way you said it was, naturally, I decided to buy a vacant house in town so I could live separate from my wife.
Well, no, we owned it already, and we were moving, and I just said, this is so hard. I can't do it. Like, so I'm going to stay over here. You stay over there. Let's just, and also, she didn't want anything to do with me for a minute too. And I couldn't blame her. And so I was in that house sleeping in, there was like 2 pieces of furniture in it, and going over and seeing my kids a little bit off and on, just whenever I could, and still trying to get ready for a major league season. Like all that was in flux. And had the pastor of my church show up at my doorstep, and just love on me like nobody's business. And we started walking together, and he, slowly but surely was help teach me about what it meant to be a real husband, and the model that I didn't have early in my life, in my own story. I was being given a gift of that by walking with other men who, what it looked like to do it differently. And that was a real transforming moment for me, for sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And at some point, you considered taking your own life, and God gave you a message instead of.
Yeah, absolutely. Like just like that time in the office with Buck and Oral, where I want to let my ego get in the way. And there's, been 4 or 5 times in my 48 years of living where I really felt like, God audibly was saying something in my spirit, where I could hear it so clearly that there was no mistaking it. And like in that office was one time, and this time it was around the same time, it was actually right before that pastor showed up, right? Like the pastor of my church showed up. I was in the carport of that house, and I had physically already, uh, made up the contraption where the hose pipe was going from the muffler right into the driver's side window. And I had a towel stuffed in the crack, and I was about to just go ahead and fall asleep. I couldn't. I was weary. I was very, very weary, tired, and knew I'd disappointed people. And I felt that like a disappointment, because it was in that time of my career where I was in between knuckleball. I was in between conventional guy and knuckleball, and I just was failing and failing and failing. And just, one of those times where my hands were like this still, maybe like this, but certainly not like this. Right. I was still wrapped up in that so much. And I had my hand on the key, and I was like, Lord, just take care of my family. And as I was starting to turn the car, I really felt God dissolve me. I felt like a puddle, and I felt like a physical weight on me, and saying, hey man, do not do it. I've got something else for you. Do not do it. Like that's all those words were it. Like that's what I heard. And so as I was turning, I mean, I might've started the car and then shut it off. And it was 2 days later when Carter Crenshaw, the pastor of my church, showed up at my doorstep and we started walking together. And so that was a real, tough time in my life, but at the same time, it had to happen that way. Like for me, it had to happen that way. It had to be
Yeah.
it had to be that intense for it to wake me up to get to the end of myself so I could be rebuilt as a man who really chased after God's heart.
Yeah. There's something more. There's something more.
Yeah, there's something else. I've got something else for you.
I've got something else for you.
And that was it. It wasn't like he didn't tell me what it was. He didn't say, hey, man, I've got a great marriage on the other side of this. Hey, I've got a Cy Young on the other side of this. Hey, I've got you being a great father on the other side of this. It wasn't anything like that. It was just, I got something else. And so he met me in that space, but still left a lot for me to have to come into. And that's what he does a lot, right? Like he gets to you and he grabs you and says, I got something else. I'm not going to tell you what that is, but you got to trust me. And here's your opportunity. And I want it. And I took that opportunity, thankfully, without any promises from him other than this was not all there was, man, for you. And God, I mean, like I get emotional talking about it because it was so intense, but he just saved me again and again and again,
That was so awesome. I loved hearing that story, and I was like shocked and couldn't believe it. Here we are, a guy, good Christian guy,
Oh yeah.
people around, pastor around, and still somehow that weariness overtook.
Yeah, and the enemy, man, he's always at work. Like he knows what buttons to push for me, and the more I become self-aware through scripture and like really knowing thyself, the better I am at being equipped to put on the full armor of God. Like I always want that on me, but there are inevitably times when my breastplate drops off or my shield falls, right? And he's on the move, man. And like when you start to see through that lens of you are in a real spiritual war, like spiritual warfare is real. There's a fight going on for my spirit and soul, and it puts things in a whole different perspective. And for me, it's helpful because I'm a competitor and I like thinking that I'm in a fight.
Yes.
Right. So if I know I'm in a fight, then that rings true for me. And I need to put on the weapons that I have and attack, like counterattack. And there are plenty of ways for me to counterattack by telling the truth, by getting in scripture, by being vulnerable, by saying I'm sorry, by taking my ego out of things. There's so many ways. Like I have a list and lists of them. And so those are the things that I've tried to cling to, over the last, that was probably midway between 2006 and 2007. And so for the last, 16 years, that's kind of what I've tried to do.
That's fantastic. You were talking about your wife right when we jumped on. And I'm like, oh, that's so awesome. I love guys that just honor their wife, and you can feel the love and how they cherish their wife. And then I hear how your wife just ultimately believes in you. And then I believe it was a teammate calls your wife and says, hey, RA decided he's going to swim the Missouri River.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. So that was at the beginning of this journey too, this knuckleball journey. And another.
And I think you should know. I think it's super dumb. I think this is super dumb.
His name was Chris Barnwell. He was one of my best friends on it. And I had, after the 2006 season with the Texas Rangers, which was my last, it was the same year that I had made the major league club. It was 1 year after I'd made the major league club with the Texas Rangers in 2006 and tied a modern day major league record for most home runs given up in a game. And so I'd made it back up to the major leagues with my knuckleball, and I'm thinking, oh God, we're going to do it this time. Great. I get out there against the Detroit Tigers and they hit 6 home runs and three in the third innings on me. And I tie a modern day major league record for most home runs given up in a game. And they sent me down the next day. And that was my last major league game with the Texas Rangers. I went down to AAA, kept grinding on the knuckleball, kept grinding. And then in 2007, I got signed with the Milwaukee Brewers. It was my only offer the whole offseason. And the Milwaukee Brewers minor league AAA affiliate is in Nashville, Tennessee, which is where I live. And that was another God moment, man, like letting me work on my marriage, letting me work on my craft, getting to be with my family, you know, getting to go to counseling with my wife, like getting to, you know, try to figure things out. Like he made it perfect for that. But
Wow.
here, vocationally, I was still struggling. Like I made the team, the AAA team in Nashville out of camp. And I was there and just, I was probably a couple of days from being released because I was really bad. I was like 1-4 with like a 7 or 8 ERA. It was really bad. And so I thought any day now they're going to release me and that'll be the end of my baseball career. And I'll have to be okay with that. But it was still painful, right? Like I was going through all these scenarios in my mind. Like, what am I going to do? What am I going to be? You know, like, okay, God, if this has been the extent of your journey in baseball for me, okay, I know you're going to provide something else, but it's still painful and I need to grieve it and all that. And part of my grieving process that was toxic was, you know, I still was hanging on to want to be somebody. Like I still like, I want to leave my mark somehow. Right. And so every year we would play the Omaha Royals and we would stay at this casino hotel right on the bank of the Missouri River. And every year we would go, like, we would play them 3 or 4 times and would go up the elevator and it would overlook the Missouri River. And I would always think to myself, I bet I could swim across that river. Okay. And I would say that to my friends and they would say, you're an idiot, right? Like you can't, nobody's swimming across that. You're an idiot. Well, it was this time in my career when I was like 1-4, right? I thought I was going to be released. It may have been my last time there. And I thought, I'm going to do it. I'm going to wake up in the morning before a game starts and I'm going to try to swim across it. And all of a sudden that spread through the team like wildfire. And everybody was like, no, you're not doing that. And I said, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. Be there. Like bring the video camera. I'm going to do it and I'm going to make it. And y'all are going to see. Like I was still wanting to be somebody, right? Like still that piece of me that wanted to be known for what he did, you know, in baseball or some other way was still there. And I showed up the next morning. I taped flip-flops from the convenience store downstairs onto my feet because it was rocky on the bank and didn't want to cut the bottom of my foot. And
So
headed
you
off.
swam with those flip flops?
Oh yeah. They were duct tape. I bought duct tape and flip-flops because I thought, well, maybe there'll be like a little fin or something, you know. Well, I get out there and, you know, Chris Barnwell called my wife as I was getting in. And my wife said, hey, look, we've been through a lot. He's a grown man. He knows what he can handle and what he can't. So call me after. I mean, she's like, hey, you know, he's going to do what he's going to do. And so I pushed off, man, and started swimming across that thing. Well, you know, little did I know 2 things. One, it was one of the fastest moving rivers in our country. And 2 is it's one of the dirtiest rivers in our country, if not the dirtiest. So I'm just hauling out there and I was a pretty good swimmer. I'd grown up swimming. I get about what I thought was a quarter way up. And all of a sudden I look back and my teammates are, you know, 200 yards down that way. Right. Like, cause the current's just taking me and the expanse of the river was really a lot. I mean, I was so stupid, but anyway, I get out there and I think, oh man, I think I could still make it, but I hadn't yet gotten into to the significant part of the current yet.
Oh
And so
no.
I'm swimming and swimming. I'm closer to shore. Like it's that big, it's that wide across. And I get about probably, I'd say really like right under half. And I just had my head down swimming and it felt like an eternity to get there. There was a buoy out there that I was aiming for. And, you know, I come up for just a breath to kind of dog paddle and see. And all of a sudden I'm in the thick of the current. I look down and I can barely see my teammates. They're really small. And I see this one guy running along the shore with me. He's just coming my way. And I mean, he's scurrying, and it was a guy named Grant Balfour who had some time in the major leagues
Yeah.
too, and we played together in Milwaukee. And he was from Australia, and he knew what it looked like for somebody to drown. I mean, like he knew he'd grown up in the ocean and tides and currents and all that, and so he recognized that I was in trouble probably. So I get out there, and I'm thinking, oh Lord, I have a choice to make right now. It's either push through, try to get to the other side of the current, or turn around and go back. And I was starting to feel lactic acid building up in my joints and I was getting tired. And meanwhile, the current, it wasn't a current this way as much as it was like at an angle. So it was pulling me down and the water was getting trapped in between my foot and my flip flop, and it was starting to pull me under really hard. So it was a lot to stay above water. And I thought, I got to turn around. And that was another God moment, right? Like if I would have pushed through, we wouldn't be talking. I would have drowned. So I thought, man, I got to turn around. I got to turn around. Self-preservation, fight or flight. I was fighting and I was flighting. I was going back, and I turned around and started making it, but there was no guarantee I could get back to the shore because the current at this point, it had pushed me so far down. Like I could see my friend running alongside me still, but I was gaining in distance on him. Like he wasn't catching up. So I started to swim as much as I could back to shore, got out of the thickness of the current, but there was still a little current. I was still way down, and I could see the shore, but I didn't think I could get there. I really didn't. I thought, this is it. I started making peace with myself, and it got so bad where I would go underwater and try to swim underwater, come up for a breath and go back underwater and swim underwater and being pulled down, didn't know how deep it was or anything like that. But as I was doing that, I was getting a little bit closer to shore. I saw it looked like a dog food factory or something, but it had a long cylinder arm that jetted out into the river where it would probably dump its contaminants, I'm sure. But I thought maybe I could make it to that, but probably not. So I started kind of doing it. And then I'll never forget, I got about 25 yards from shore and just my body stopped. And I just started sinking. And
25 yards, it's the finish line. It's right
yeah,
there.
it's right there. It wasn't very far at all, especially how much I swam. But you got to remember, I'd been out there for a while.
Yeah.
And I
I've done
thought,
some
this is
endurance runs, and I had the lactic acid over the
oh man,
summer, and it
yeah,
was
I was burning, every
105
joint was
degrees. And
burning.
yeah, I know
And so
exactly what you're talking about.
just started sinking. I thought, I'm gonna make this quick, and I'm just gonna take in water in my mouth. And I'll never forget this sensation. I wrote about it in the book, like weeping underwater. Like that's a weird sensation, to be crying underwater. And I remember that real, because I thought, I'm never gonna see my kids again. What an idiot. What a really stupid thing to do. And I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. And I just remember sinking and with my last breath. And as I was about to open my mouth and taking a bunch of water to try to end it, my feet hit the clay bottom of the river. And I thought, oh my God, I might only be like 10 or 12 feet down. And so I felt the shot of adrenaline, and I pushed up and like swept my arms this way and was able to get to the surface. And I just kind of bounced along the bottom until I got to close to the side where this arm was coming out. And Grant Balfour had made his way to me somehow. And he was shimmied out kind of on that arm, and he had his hand was reached out, and I pushed up one time and just reached my hand up, and he caught it and drug me to shore. And that was the Missouri River story. And after I left the Missouri, I went in the Missouri River 1-4 with like a 7 ERA. And this was in 2007 with the Milwaukee Brewers AAA affiliate. And when I got out of the river, I remember just thinking, God, I'm so sorry. What an idiot. I'm so sorry. I will not, I've learned my lesson. This is ridiculous. I'm so stupid. And was apologizing thinking about the apology to my wife. Like she had no idea how close to death I was, and all this stuff. And from then on, I was so tired, and I went in with white underwear and a white tank top. And when I got out, both of those things were black. That's how dirty that river was. Like, I mean, who knows? I thought I was like growing an ear out of my cheek or something when a couple of days later. But I was exhausted physically. And wouldn't you know it, that night I got in the game.
No way.
Yeah. I thought there's no way. Like I was late to the field. I was tired. The coaches knew what had happened. They were like, "You're an idiot. What are you doing?" And I think they put me in the game just
On
for
purpose.
spite. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
For spite. And so I got in the game just completely exhausted, ended up throwing 3 scoreless, hitless innings, got a spot start the next time, and then didn't come out of the rotation the rest of the year and ended up being the PCL pitcher of the year. So I went in at 1-4 with like a 7 ERA. At the end of the year, I was 11. I ran off a streak of 11-2 with like a 2.6 ERA and ended up winning the PCL pitcher of the year after the Missouri River. And that was kind of the springboard into the rest of my career, really, was just this ultimate surrender to, God, I'm finished trying to get in the way of what you have planned. I'm so sorry. And so my career was constantly this balance between being open-handed and wanting to cling, and being open-handed and wanting to cling. And so that was the story of the Missouri. Yeah.
I had a similar drowning experience. I was going over these waterfalls and family, extended family and all this. And it was in a flood stage thing in a place
Oh,
called
Lord.
Johnson Shut-ins, but we
Yeah.
didn't know it was flood stage.
Oh, yeah.
And the current and all the stuff. And I'd gone over probably 7, 8, 9, 12 waterfalls, and the waterfall pushes you down. So you can't swim up. You got to swim diagonal out, but you can't get diagonal out until you hit the bottom and push off and get some
Oh,
momentum. And finally I
very,
was like, I'm done. I'm done. I can't do
yeah.
this anymore. And popped up and I got one last breath. I said, oh, thank you, God. I said, God, though, if there's one more, I'm done. I don't
Yeah.
got it in me anymore. Like I'm
Yeah. I know the
exhausted.
feeling.
And it was peaceful. It was
Oh,
peaceful. Like there wasn't like turmoil or nothing. And then one more happened. I duck under. I said, oh man, God, if this is the way it's going to be, well, it's all up to you. So I'm okay with this. Like I know where I'm going to go. I'm
yeah.
okay with this. I still can't believe this is really how it's happening. Uh,
Yeah.
and then my shorts flew down to my ankles and I had to make a decision. What am I going to do?
Oh my goodness.
I might die anyway, but do I want to die naked or with
Yeah.
shorts?
Right.
I decided with shorts.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
then came up, got one more little breath. Another one happened. I said, God, I wish you would save me. And I'll be doggone if that waterfall or the next waterfall I hit, this green arm stuck through the water and is just floating there. There was no body attached to it that I could see. I said, oh my goodness, God, that is you. You're going to save me. I
Wow.
reached out and I grabbed a hold of that sucker with 2 hands
Yeah.
and I squeezed tight, and that arm was slimy and slippery and slipped right through it.
Oh man.
And I thought, that wasn't what I expected. And then that green arm snatched back and snatched me out of the water and picked me up. And it was a dad.
Oh man.
And he looked right at me and he says, how are you? I said,
Oh
well,
man.
trying. I got all this water in my lungs. I said, well, I've been better. I've been better. I
Yeah.
said, was that fun? Well, all things considered, yeah, it was kind of funny. Said, can I shoot my kids up there? So,
Oh my gosh. He had no idea that you were about to die. That's it.
yeah. I thought I was looking at the face of God. I'm like, no, this is a real dad. And he just said something so stupid that real dads would say. So got it. Yeah.
That's
I laid
hysterical.
down there for about 30 minutes trying to get the
I
water out of
bet.
my lungs and get
Yeah.
some air in. And my family's stuck and they can't get to where I'm at. I'm like, I don't know how I'm gonna get
Oh,
it.
wow.
Anyway, but yeah, so I very much relate to the drowning story and having
Yeah.
conversations with God and surrendering, like you said. And it's so funny how your career and kind of life perspective changed to
Yeah.
God's in
It's
control and I'm going to trust him and believe in him.
miraculous.
And the fear thing, we were talking about that earlier. Fear is kind of not believing God's going to do what God said he's going to do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Right. Like that for me is probably fear. And then also, but there are so many different types of fear for me, like fear of disappointment, fear of not fulfilling my potential, fear of, all these things. And I would say that they could trace back to that, right? Like God, not believing God is who he said he was. Like it's all like fear is not from God, right? Like there's no coincidence that the phrase in the Bible that's uttered more than any other phrase is "do not fear." I mean, there's no coincidence to that, because that is kind of the genesis of how the enemy likes to attack you in every way, right? Like fear of being alone, fear, like all these fears that now we'll label them differently, like anxiety, depression, but it all probably is substrated in that feeling of fear. And so that's why he warns us, hey, do not fear. And this is why you do not fear. Right. So, and I would agree with you,
In your baseball career, you had problems with that. To throw a
yeah,
bullpen that was lights out with a
yeah,
knuckleball.
yeah. I
And then,
I had plenty of times when I thought, have I ever thrown a knuckleball before? Like I would get in these bullpens and it'd be like, how am I going to compete with what I just did? Like, there's no way I'm going to, and then undoubtedly I would spend moments doing that. And then, I would have to surrender to, it's going to be what it's going to be. I'm just going to go out there and try to, reduce every pitch to its separate commitment and go forward. And it would end up okay. Like I'd get through it, but it was this constant, song and dance of, having to surrender, like things would manifest, God would teach me, and then I'd surrender. Right. And it didn't go perfectly all the time. Right. Like, I mean,
Right,
there were plenty of times when I would surrender and I'd be out in the third inning because I got blown up. But what a great, and then there was an opportunity, right? There was an opportunity not to fear again, right? Like, and he kept giving me opportunities to cultivate the thing that he asked me not to do not fear, right? So he would put me in positions where I could choose that. I could choose not to fear and to really surrender and to trust and, to find my value in other things and to know that I'm a child of the living God and not, not just a baseball player or someone that has to do this or has to do that. And it began to manifest in something that, like, I got the joy back of, hey, this is just what I get to do. It's not who I am. Right. And so that joy, is what you saw when I got to pitch, right? Like I so enjoyed getting to do my craft because it wasn't all who I was. Right. I wasn't tied up in it.
And you coach your son now. And
Yeah.
I got a couple teams I coach, and I see the little girls have that fearful look when they're about to go do something. They're afraid,
Yeah.
nervous,
Yeah.
anxious. And
Yeah.
I grab a
Sure.
hold of them, put my arm on
Sure.
their shoulder, and I say, "Hey, we've done a lot of practice. You've put in a lot of work. You've you've set yourself up to succeed in this situation.
Yeah.
So just go do what we've done. It's going to be just fine. The result's going to be the result. The result's going to be the result of the practice that we had coming up to it. You're going to do good. You got this."
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
just look at me and, "All right, coach, I got it."
Yeah.
It changes the whole thing. So I try to catch them before they get in that fight or flight fear mode. I'm like, when they're up there in fear, there's nothing that good that's going to happen.
Oh yeah, they're going to press and make mistakes because of that, all of it. That's true. I think like with my 16-year-old bunch, I always try to tell them, look, the game of baseball and just like life in general, academics, relationship, it's about how to manage failure, right? Like you're going to fail. It's okay. I like the idea of people becoming, or at least understanding that the only real tragedy in failure is if you don't learn from it, right? Like that's the real tragedy in failure. So how to manage failure is really one of the best attributes that I can teach any child, or any kid that's trying to get better at something. Like and I can tell you from experience, I can tell you just about every home run that I've ever given up in the major league, but I not hardly recall the good things that happened. Like I don't celebrate well, but I can remember every failure I had, right? Like we don't do a good job of that. So there's two things about that. One is, like, if you fail, that's okay. Like that's good in the sense that you can learn something from it. And so let's write it down. Like, okay, so your strike percentage was 40%. Okay, well, there you go. Now you have something to attach that to, right? That's okay. We can get better from that. Like, so if you learn from those things, and it could be anything, then you can apply it in your bullpens in between outings. You can work on it on the side. You can get a chance to do it again next outing. And so there's really nothing to fear about the failure because you're going to learn from it ultimately. And if you do well, there's still, let's celebrate that. So let's teach you how to celebrate well. Because if you're constantly, picking apart your own performance because of how well you do or don't do, then ultimately that's going to become who you are. That's going to become your identity. But if you're able to celebrate too, then you can hold both in a real mature way. And so teaching kids how to celebrate well, whether that's taking a day just to reflect and meditate on their favorite pitches of that outing, or the fact that they hit an opposite field double and drove in 2 runs, like let's relive that. Let's go out and have a steak, or let's go celebrate this thing that you did. Like, so being able to hold both, like that's real spiritual maturity, right? Like being able to hold what's broken about the world and what's great about the world and really take steps forward with both. And that's what we try to teach our kids, on our teams. Or, how do you do that? What equipment can we give you to help you hold both well? And that's a real trick, man. It's difficult to do that. And you can't do it apart from scripture. That's what I have found. Like there is no way to teach somebody to do that well. Now you might get it right a couple of times, but ultimately you're going to fall back to that human part of validation, and who you are and what you are is your performance. You're going to fall back into that unless you look through it a spiritual lens. That's the only way. And that's what we try to teach, And those are the guys that have the most success at the major league level. I'm not saying they're all believers, but they all understand conceptually that there's something greater than themselves, right? Like they do. It's not who they are. Like ultimately they have to get to that spot, or they'll fall into addiction, they'll fall into medicating, and with pornography, they'll find some way to escape the pain of not being that thing they think they should be.
Right.
And
Right. Yes.
that's hard. That's really hard for a man. And so my gift, hopefully, to my kids that I coach is to help them identify that piece and the toxicity around that. And here's the healthy way to do it.
You've got some the 16-year-olds, so they're through puberty or going through puberty and all that. You said there's a distinct difference between before puberty and after,
Yeah.
especially being a coach and figuring that out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, especially with boys. Now, I can speak. I didn't coach my girls, right? They
Okay.
played sports that I would work with them, and they receive information from a father much differently than a son does. And so I would say, with my son, and trying to coach my son, it's not helpful to bring up the things that I did well. See, can't you do this? This is how I did it, right? Like I fell into that trap for a minute, I think if you understand that every boy that's going through puberty, it starts to try to identify what is it to be a man. They're asking one singular question, and it's super important. And that question is, do I have what it takes?
Yes.
Do I have what it takes? Like they're going to ask it in a million different ways, with their behavior, with their words, with the way they react, with how emotional they are. They're going to respond to that question that they're asking subconsciously all the time. Do I have what it takes? I see my dad do this, or I see this man my friend's father do this. Do I have what it takes to do that? Do I have what it takes to be a dad, to earn money, to pay for a family, to work hard, to make good decisions, to manage finances, to do I have what it takes? That's the question that all these kids are asking. And so my job as a coach with my son is to help him understand that he does not have what it takes. And it sounds it's counterintuitive, right? But the gift in that is I don't have what it takes, and I need Jesus to help me. And so if I can give him that, then I've given him humility. I've given him dependence on God. I've given him turning to, I want him to turn to scripture and not to the world, to the culture, to find out answers to things. I give him that gift. If I say to him, look, I'm still asking that question, Eli, I'm still asking the question, do I have what it takes? And the answer is I don't, and I need help every day. I need help in the form of other men and good relationship. I need help in the form of my relationship with a living God. I need help in Christian companionship with your mom. I need all this. I need help. I do not have what it takes. I'm not meant to have what it takes even more, right? I'm not built like that. I'm built with this thing in me that calls out for God. And only through that relationship will I ever have what it takes. And so if I can give him that gift, that's the key, man. That's what I have seen be the most transforming thing on this side of the curtain, is helping boys identify the fact that it's okay that you're asking that question, and the answer is no, you don't have what it takes.
That's a great answer. I love that. I've heard so many different men talk about that question, and especially for boys, but girls have it too. My daughter says, "Hey, let's go try out for this team," and they're the best select team in the area, in the region. And I said, what if you don't make it? And she says, it's not about making the team. It's more about figuring out where I stack up.
Yeah. Constantly measuring ourselves against that, right? Like we are. And it's really, really hard. And for boys in particular, it's so competitive. Like it's in us, it's innate that we are wanting to be alpha, and we're wanting to, we're wanting to compete and be better and do this. And I'm looking to my right and left, and, teaching kids that, God's got a specific plan for your life that's very unique, and that's how much he loves you. And it might be in baseball, it might not, but to buy into that, that's a real hard thing to help a child understand. Is the thing that they love to do. It might, like, there's less than 0.001% of people that ever walk the planet that are professional athletes. I mean, let's be real about it, right? So if a kid has that aspiration, that's great. You don't stomp on that, but helping them understand that they're more than that, that's the key, right? And so, that question, again, like addressing that question in a godly way is the thing that I have found is most transforming for people to get a hold of. The fact that, you have to have, there's a spiritual component to this that has to be present for you to really understand that your value is not in what you do. You're not built that way. You're not built for that. You're built for this, right? And you get to tell them what this is,
And it sounded like you made a mistake or two along the way coaching your son that you had to go back and apologize for.
Oh yeah, man. And still do. I mean, I still get so competitive on the bench. Sometimes I'm thinking, I'm constantly asking God in the moment, like, man, God, give me patience here. Like, how do you want me to address this? I'm asking, like, verbally, like out loud. I'm saying I need help because I'm about to blow a gasket here, right? Like I need a way to address this.
There's been a few times. Yeah.
And I found that with my son in particular, like, he receives information from me by me coaching somebody else. So if I want to tell him something directly, I don't tell it to him directly most of the time. Most of the time I'll coach the kid next to him, and he'll take it in, he'll receive it, he'll hear it. If I talk directly to him, dad doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, dad doesn't know, right? Like, I can't receive, I'm better than dad. Like that measurement is going off. Like, do I have what it takes? If he's telling me that I'm inadequate in some way, then that means I don't have what it takes, right? Like that's how teenagers process information, right? Shame, they're shame bound by nature. Like, the enemy that's part of the dichotomy of man, is that we're shame bound, right? Like, so we can, through scripture and a relationship with Christ, we can understand that we don't have to, we can live in the freedom of not being ashamed. Like, those are the most healthy kids and the most healthy people around, they take in information negatively and process it positively, right? Like, so if I say to you, hey man, you need to cover first base on a ball to the left side, you didn't do that right there, right? Like, that's just data. But they take it in as I'm inadequate. I didn't do it.
Yes.
Right. They take in the shame of that and they feel less. And so my goal is to how do I communicate in a way where they don't feel shamed, but they feel empowered to do it right the next time. Well, if with my own son, the dynamic is completely different. If I tell that to a teammate of his, he'll take it in and he'll say, yeah, I get that. Okay, I made a mistake. Yeah. I should have done that better. If I tell it to my son, he thinks I'm inadequate. So a lot of times I'll tell it to the kid next to him, or I'll tell it to him as a group.
Yep. Absolutely.
That has proven to be helpful for me. But there are certain times, like in pitching, where I really can see, I can say to him, like, you can trust me. Like, if you do this, you will become better. And here's why, because I've fallen down a lot. Like, sharing with my son my failures has been a real bonus too. Like, he learns much more from me sharing about how, giving up home runs to Giancarlo Stanton or, Aaron Judge, than he has from me throwing a one hitter. Because when I tell him I've thrown, I won the Cy Young or whatever else, that doesn't, like, he may never be able to do that, right? Like, he thinks I've got to do that to be better than you, and that's how we're wired, because we're constantly in this, especially in our culture now, right? Like, because we got Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat, and we're constantly seeing Twitter, and we're, this guy's being committed to this college. Why aren't I? Why, it's you're fighting against that all the time. And
that
so
comparison thing all the time.
It's in our culture, it's so prevalent today. And that's, it's no, I read an article the other day that said, anxiety and depression have gone up by a factor of, 7,000%, whatever it was, some ridiculous percentage since X year. And that X year was the advent of Instagram.
Oh my goodness.
Is that incredible? So
Yeah.
they did the research to trace it back to the year that Instagram was introduced.
I
And
saw something about relationship and
yeah,
something
man,
called
and where,
phubbing,
oh,
PHUBBING, where spouses will turn to their phone and turn away from their spouse. Like we're trying to have a conversation and then they'll grab the phone. And I'm like, holy cow, they got a term for it. And apparently it's been around for years.
yeah, oh my goodness. Well, I found that really interesting. So as parents, and fathers, like we're constantly fighting, pushing back against that too. So setting good, clear boundaries around screen time and phone use, I think that's a real relevant thing in our culture, and teaching kids, what God says about comparison and what God says about who you are is of the utmost importance.
Yeah. So what you said with coaching your son, we can use that in parenting also. Like pay attention to how you can deliver messages that make sense, sharing vulnerably from our failures, things that we'd like other people to learn from instead of our successes all the time. And
Oh, and I'll tell you something else just to interrupt you because I'll
yeah,
forget it
yeah,
if I
please do.
uh the thing too that just kind of popped into my spirit that, is a failure of mine with my own son is so many times he will not hear what I say because of the tone in which I say it. So he won't I'll say that the most true and accurate and relevant thing, but I'll say it with a voice inflection that's harsh, and he won't hear it. But if I talk to him just normally, like I would talk to another grown up in conversation, he has a much better chance of soaking it in or taking it. And so I have realized that a lot of kids don't hear what you say because the tone, they hear your tone, not your words. And that's important to realize too. I think the delivery, talking about methods of delivery for kids, especially your teenage sons or daughters, and especially with my daughters, because my daughters do not want to disappoint their dad. And so, I can bring them to tears just by raising my voice this much, right? Like, I mean, that's how they're wired. And so I've got to be real careful with that. And I found with Eli, my son, and my younger son, Bantu, who's 12 and starting to step into puberty, if I raise my voice but say something really accurate and true, they're not going to hear it like they would if I just talk to them in a real, kind way. And that's where I've fallen down a lot, admittedly. Like I'm passionate about pitching because I've just poured so much of my time, energy, and effort into it. So sometimes I'll have to say, "Hey, man, I'm so sorry that I did that because I'm passionate about what I do. It's what I did for a living. So I'm sorry. That's why I probably raised my voice, but this is what I want you to see." And right. And I'll apologize, and then I'll get to my point, and they'll take it in. They'll take it in. And these kids that I coach at the high school level, they don't care what I say until they know I care, period.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So if I really care about them as human beings, they're much more likely to take the information that I'm giving them in and apply it. But they got to know I care first. And to care, you got to spend time and be genuine and be open with your own stuff. And, that's something you got to learn to do. And it's hard.
I was talking with Mark Hancock. He started Trail Life. He was one of the guys that started Trail Life. He's now in charge of it. And he's like, kids ask, who's in charge? Like when they show up to something, who's in charge?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That
they
makes
say, okay, now that we know he's in charge or she's in charge, whoever's in charge, do they care? And do they care about me? So yes, absolutely.
Yeah. That's a
And
real thing.
then he's like, when boys rally around, they're like, all right, what's our mission? What are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish? Like, let's go.
Yeah.
Now that we know who's leading, we know they care. They care about me. Like, I'm all in. Let's go. When I hear you speak, I'm like, all right, what are we doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm ready to follow. Like, what are we doing? Who are we taking? Like, let's go. We're ready.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you've just got those leadership qualities. It's awesome to
Uh-huh.
hear. I know something important to you. Sound of Freedom is a big movie that's out there right now.
Mm.
Over 100 million at the box office, and I think they were hoping to do. If we could do 20, that'd be a great success. And you know,
Yeah.
people vote with their dollars, and man, have they voted with their dollars on this one. And guys, if you haven't heard of the movie, I haven't seen it yet because I'm afraid to go see it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's a valid fear. I mean, because it will open your eyes to things that are ongoing in our culture and
When
community.
I say fear, I don't mean fear. I mean, like, I know I'm going to see some things
Yeah.
that are going to well up emotion in me, and I know
Yeah.
are going to change me as a person. And it's like a cautious might be the better word. Like, I need to be ready for this.
Yeah. And yeah, I think I would encourage you to just, pray before you go, right? Like, I think that's good to do with anything you're stepping into, but a movie like that too. And there's this, this thing you'll come out to and you'll feel overwhelmed. You'll feel overwhelmed because a lot of people don't understand um, that kind of subculture that's going on of human trafficking. But it's something that's real passionate to me, for me, because I suffered sexual trauma when I was young. And so when I got healthy, I wanted to really give back in that space. And so I worked with a anti-human trafficking organization out of Mumbai, India, which is one of the highest trafficked places in the world. From an international standpoint, they get people from Nepal and they bring them in, and they'll go into these communities where they'll say, hey, we want to recruit your daughter to come work cleaning hotels and send back money to you, and to these tribes who aren't even social security numbers, mind you, like they're ghosts. They can't track them, but they think that they're going to be able to send money back. They'll recruit them to do that, and then they'll put them in these brothels and just abuse them and abuse them and abuse them and break them and break them and break them. And I've seen that firsthand. And so I went over there and worked with that organization for quite some time. And then when I quit playing baseball in 2017, I felt like God was calling me into getting involved in my own neighborhood, like saying to me, hey man, this is a problem internationally, but I've got something for you here locally. I think you should be involved in your own community. And not 2 days later, I'm not kidding you, 2 days later, a woman showed up at my door, knowing the work I'd done with the Bombay Teen Challenge, which is the organization I worked with, showed up at my door, and she was starting a 501(c) called NAHT Coalition, which is the Nashville Anti-Human Trafficking Coalition. And so, but not only did God put that in my heart, but he gave me immediately somebody. And I was like, oh my gosh, I could not have been punched in the face any harder, right? So I said, sure, I'll be on the board of directors I'll help you with what I know and give what I got. And so that's what I do now with a lot of my spare time, is work in that space. But to your point, it's a hard thing to talk about. It's kind of that white elephant in the room with a lot of people. We can talk about our alcohol addiction, and we can talk about pornography, and we can talk about these things as men, but the human trafficking space has always been that thing that has felt like taboo to talk about. And so you don't hear a lot of traction around it. This movie is undoing that in a lot of ways. And it is hard to hear and understand that this is a real thing. It's not some made up thing to try to provoke any kind of emotion. It is a real thing. And the emotion that you feel is raw and real, because you should respond like that to a movie like this. And here locally, like in my own community, I live in the middle of very affluent neighborhoods, and it's going on to a degree that would be mind blowing to you, even in the most affluent neighborhoods, through social media and other ways. And so I've been a part of probably 60 rescues in my own community over the last 4 years, 5 years. And I'm talking about rescues where, teenage girls have been trafficked out of the homes of their uncles who owe debts to businessmen who they work with. Inevitably they're all hooked on some kind of drug so that they're dependent. And then we are able to go in and rescue them and help put them on a path of rehabilitation. But it's all a Christ-centered organization, because in my opinion, that's the only sustaining thing to help people not go back to that life. That's one of the things I saw internationally. That was not the biggest piece in the organization I worked with internationally, that Christ component. And here locally, that is the thing that we help educate people with curriculum around, that have come out of that world, that help them sustain a life that is different. Because if you turn away from something so dark and evil, you better have something equally as light, filled with light and hope and love to turn to. If you don't, you will inevitably go back. It's like proven. The
Wow.
data supports that. So you better give them something that's better to offer them. And most of these women, that do return, they return because somehow over time they have felt like they have become important
Oh,
in
wow.
some way. Right. Yeah, it's really toxic and horrible. But anyway, that's one of the things that I do. And a lot of it was because of my story early on in my life. Just knowing a little bit about the wounds that are around sexual trauma. I have a real heart for that space.
Yeah, you had a few different instances of different things when you were growing up, and it's hard to think, wow, God will use that for the good. And
Oh man, yeah. I mean, that's a whole different deep question, right? But when you're an 8-year-old boy and you're being
yeah,
sexually abused, it's a whole different. It's hard to think through that lens, right? But I will say that my personal experience, has been that, that they're what the enemy meant for harm and evil, God has changed into something to His glory, and that's a real miracle, right? Like I see God in so many different ways in my life, and I'm so thankful for it. And that's one of the ways, is that what God means for, what the enemy means for death and destruction and evil, God turns to beauty and goodness and hope and love, and all the things that you hope for in this world, this side of eternity.
so say we watch that movie Sound of Freedom, or
Hmm.
we say this human trafficking thing, really? Huh.
Hmm.
All right. So it is a big thing. I'm in St. Louis, so we hear about it more often.
Yeah.
We're on a central highway, and apparently it's a big thing here. There's some organizations here, but guys that are listening, you hear about horrific stories, and you
Yeah.
think, what can we do? What can we do? Guys like to take action. So, is there anything you can think of?
Well, no, I appreciate that. And that is a good question. I think getting involved, from a volunteer standpoint in a local organization that you have vetted and believe in, is important. Like, this space needs more male voices. That's why, Caviezel's portrayal has brought a lot of awareness. I think not brushing it under the rug when you do hear it in public forums is important, like to keep perpetuating the awareness around the fact that this is destroying children and lives. And the nuclear fallout from this goes well beyond the initial abduction. And it's nuclear. And so just getting on your knees and praying for direction, how you can help, is giving, like financially. Like, I know that's something as men that we can feel value in getting to do, is give some of our resources to help educate, promote awareness, stop all the organizations that you can get involved with that will help do that, treat, rehabilitate, like these women who have been, and men that have been pulled out of that industry. And it is an industry. It is a
Mm-hmm.
money make industry, and it's run all over the world by different organizations, people, as it's just sick. And so understanding kind of what you're up against is important too. And I think that the greatest trick of the devil ever was convincing people he didn't exist, right? Like, so
Yeah.
this is a real thing, and he's working in the shadows to try to help people. You see a lot of publicly in articles, and I don't get political with things much, but you do see things trying to discredit the movie a lot of ways. And that's just the enemy at work, trying to convince people that he's not there, really. Right. It's brilliant. The two greatest strategies are to divide and conquer, like in marriage.
Yep.
Divide people so that he can get at you, and convincing people that he's not real. Those two
Yeah.
things, those are his best arrows, those two things. And so if we can help push back against that, then we're doing some good.
When you're hearing RA say that, guys, if you've never checked out a book called Screw Tape Letters, it's incredible.
Yeah, by C.S. Lewis. It's a great book.
Unbelievable. So that's
Yeah.
showing the tools that the devil uses and how he trains his, minions or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's it. They're his demons, his
Yeah.
disciples. Like he's got an army too, right? Like, that's scriptural. And so we got to just know what we're up against and what kind of fight we're in, and let that kind of be a call to arms.
I get
And part of
shivers even mentioning it and thinking about that book.
Yeah. It was brilliant. It was brilliant for sure.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Have you got any other things you want to share? And then I always ask guys for a challenge also. So if you want to throw something out that men can do from week to week, could be something simple or it could be something a little bit harder.
Well, I think the perpetual hardship for me and it would be the challenge that I would leave to anybody listening, and a re-challenge to myself, too, is just, I don't know if there's a better attribute for a human being than being self-aware, and both good and bad. Like, so like writing the things that you're good at down and writing the things that you're bad at down, and understanding really who you are as a human being, goes a long way in you fixing the things that you're not good at and augmenting the things that you are good at. And so I think putting to paper that's my challenge.
That's an
Take 30,
awesome challenge.
take 30 minutes this week and spend time just writing down the things that you think you do well and the things that you could get much better at in relationship, in your vocation. It could be things like, I could be a harder worker. I could be less lazy. I'm thinking I'm talking about my own stuff. I could use kinder words to my wife. I could, whatever it is, I could get in the word 30 minutes more a week. I could get in, be a part of, like, there are all kinds of things that if you really are honest about yourself, that you can find. And then on the good side, like, write the things that you're good at, like being tenderhearted, being vulnerable, being genuine, being loving to your family, investing time, investing resources in them, investing, caring for your family. And that list is over here, and just pray on it, right? Like, pray that God would help you see the things that you don't do well, because he wants you to be a complete human being through Christ. And he wants to call you into a more Christ-like behavior. And if you don't know what that looks like, there's no way you can become it. And so putting it on paper helps you see what you can do better. And it's about growth this side of the curtain, man. Like, God calls to cultivate us all the time. And that's a life worth living. It's a life that's super rich. And it's something that I really crave and desire. And I would hope that for other men too. So that would be my challenge. Self-awareness. Try to get better at being self-aware.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So a few things that you talked about and I omitted or didn't solidify, letting it go. And that knuckleball was a big metaphor for just letting it go.
Yeah. Yeah. That pitch is so unique in the sense that I can control what I can control, right? So one of the things I tell my kids, that's a little bit probably a deeper answer than you're after, but on one side of the column, you've got these boxes that you can check, that you can control: how hard you work, how you listen, the way you treat people, like all these boxes on the left side that are things that you can control. You have a say. And then over here on the other side are things that you can't control. Somebody makes an error in the field, what somebody thinks about you sometimes, an accident, whatever it is over here. And you'll start to find that the more boxes that you check over here that you can control, the more you can influence the things that you don't think that you can control, which is a real neat thing to see. Like, if I work hard, if I'm not lazy, if I'm kind-hearted, if I'm productive, if I'm in those things that I can control, then all of a sudden I'll start to influence the thing I don't think I control, what people think of me, my reputation sometimes, like rumors, like all these things. You'll start to see an overlap, which is really mind-blowing to people. So, letting go is about surrendering to the things that you can't control and really working hard at the things that you can control. And there's a real peace in me letting go of a knuckleball, knowing that I have checked all of these boxes. I've worked hard in between outings. I've gotten my work in. I've studied the weaknesses of the opposing team. I've mechanically been sound. I've had the right thought life, as far as this pitch. I can control those things. And then when I let go, there's a real freedom to that, like a real freedom to, okay, whatever it is, it is. And now what do I do next? Well, I build my position well. I encourage my teammate. I make the next pitch. I can, there's all those things too. So letting go is about really understanding what you do well. What you can control and the things that you can't.
That is fantastic. I'm glad we added that. And then
Yeah.
after the Missouri River, almost drowning, you shifted to living your life well every 5 minutes.
Yes. Yes. So there's this real devotion on my part, like to try to live more micro and less macro. I mean, macro is great. Like God calls us to have vision and dreams and hopes. But if I can reduce, for instance, in pitching, I'll give you an illustration. If I throw 100 pitches in a game, that is for me 100 separate commitments throughout the game. So I can't get to the ninth inning unless I've gotten the first pitch right. Like, so in my mind, I think, how can I make this pitch the very best pitch it can be? That's over. Here's the second pitch. How can I commit to making this pitch? So I do that 100 times in a game. That's the real discipline of being a pro, right? Like that's of being an artist, really. So my hope was always, how can I go from being a survivor at my craft to being a workman, and then ultimately to being an artist. Like I want to be an artist with that pitch. And to be an artist, I've got to reduce my outing to 100 singular commitments. Same thing in relationship. Like, how can I invest in this time with you so that you understand that you are the most important thing in this moment, right? Like I'm giving that as a gift and I'm receiving from you that same gift. And so if I can commit to this time with you wholeheartedly, genuinely, authentically, then I can go on with my day knowing that I was who I needed to be. And if I can do that over and over again and reduce my life down to these micro commitments, and then you'll find that the macro ends up being much bigger than you could have ever dreamed of without taking care of the micro. Does that make sense?
That absolutely makes sense. And the two coexist really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. They do. Because and really well in the sense that, the dreams and hopes and visions that I never could have dreamed of winning a Cy Young. I could have never dreamed of leading the league in strikeouts over Clayton Kershaw and Steven Strasburg and all these I could have never dreamed of that. Right? But I did it. And the only way I was able to do something like that was by concentrating on the moment that was in front of me. And ultimately, when you carry that over into your everyday life with your relationships and the things that you do with your children and your wife, it's really about, how do I live the next 5 minutes well, right? How do I reduce my 24-hour day? Or let's say you're awake for 12 hours or 13 hours, or 14 hours, and you're sleeping for whatever the difference is. How do I reduce those 14 hours to 5-minute increments where I really get to, like, how do I wash this dish well that I'm about to leave here and go wash the dishes? How do I do that well and get that done efficiently? While my wife and children are out of town, or my wife and girls are out of town, how do I do that well so that I can get on with my day and be who I need to be? So if you can kind of get to that headspace, you'll see a lot of differences occur in your life that you never thought possible, really, from in a macro level, at a macro level. Does that make sense? I might not have explained.
No, that absolutely makes sense. And then I love how we can tie it into Cy Young Award winner. And yes, I do dishes.
Yeah. Well, that's the truth of it. I've got a 40-acre farm. After dishes, I've got to go mow the grass, and then I've got to take one of my kids to football. Like I know my list. And so how do I execute my list well and be real devoted to trying to do it the best I can be? That's one of the things I really appreciate about the Japanese culture. Like it seems like,
oh yeah,
traditionally they're so devoted. I have so many
was
friends.
it Ichiro that told you that?
Ichiro, but more than Ichiro, watching Ichiro work, yes. But his translator, who is one of my really good friends that we still contact and talk about God a lot together, his name is Ken Barron. And Ken Barron was his translator, who was a Japanese American guy, spent some time in the military, believer. We got to spend some real quality time together and just talking about kind of their perspective, especially traditionally, they're singularly devoted to getting the details right. There's this word in the Japanese language called kaizen, and kaizen is simply like this never-ending search for becoming better, right? Like this constant, perpetual, how can I do this better? How can I do this better? Like renewing. There's this renewal to that word, right? Like, how can I renew for better is really the way that it's translated, renew for better. And so how can I constantly do that over and over again? Like, I really appreciate about that culture, that concept. And to have tried to kind of do it in some of the things that I do around here. I have a 40-acre farm, and we have, horses and chickens, and we grow some of our own food. And so, doing that well is fun for me, and trying to do that well, at least, is fun for me.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Didn't expect to
Yeah.
talk about Ichiro or his translator either.
Yeah, he's awesome. Ken Barron. Still talk to him today.
That's great. Well, thank you genuinely from myself, and then also from all the guys that are going to listen to this. We're going to chop it into 2 parts and allow guys
Sure.
to digest this one. There's so many great things in this one, and tons of notes. I just can't thank you enough for how generous you've been.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad we got to find time to do it. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right, guys, check out the next episode. Follow through on the challenge. Write down things. Become more self-aware. Write down what you're good at and things that you could get better at. Some areas that you're not so skillful at. By having that self-awareness, it'll help you out quite a bit in life and help you make better decisions about how to spend your time and what to do and who to be around and where to donate your time. Doesn't help if you can't swing a hammer volunteering to be a carpenter.
Good point. The other caveat to that too is, like, once you get that list made, having relationships that you can be vulnerable with, letting people in to see your list and hold you accountable to some of that stuff. We all need it. And so there's a couple of men that, like, I'll share, hey man, I need to be a better husband, and this is how I can do it. Will you please hold me accountable? If you see it out of place, like, call me out on it. If you see me doing it well, really encourage me with it, whether it's opening the door for my wife, or, talking sweetly about her in public, or, treating somebody with whatever it is, like having a couple of men in your life, or even one, to help call you to the mat on some things, and giving them permission to do that will even elevate that. So if the initial challenge is be self-aware and do that on your own and write it down to make it permanent, and so that you can see it, and, inviting somebody into that space, that's the next step. And helping execute the things that you want to really grow into.
Thank you for adding that gem right there. That was awesome.
Yeah, no problem. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure. And look forward to you guys listening to the next episode, and we'll catch you later.